58 seconds, that is how long Senator Ted Cruz sat in silence after Pam Bondi placed a file on the witness table and pushed it toward the committee. Not toward her own attorney, not toward the chair, toward the committee. Toward Cruz specifically, who had spent the prior 20 minutes pressing her with the structured, methodical precision of a former Supreme Court litigator, building what he believed was an airtight sequence of questions designed to force an admission about the department's handling of the Epstein file review. He had been the questioner, she had been the witness. And then in a single motion, Bondi reached into the folder beside her, produced a document Cruz had not seen, and placed it on the table with a sentence that the room required 58 seconds to fully process. The court reporter stopped typing at 6 seconds. Cruz's pen stopped moving at 9. The committee chair leaned forward at 14. And by the time 58 seconds had passed and Cruz finally looked up from the document in front of him, the architecture of the hearing had been inverted. The questioner was now holding a document he needed to explain, and the witness was watching him read it. You need to stay with this until the very end, because what Bondi placed on that table did not end the inquiry. It changed who was conducting it. And Cruz's response, when it finally came, stunned the committee in a way that no prior session in this series had produced from either side of the witness table. Senate Commerce Committee hearing room, Wednesday morning. The session had been structured from the outset as a Cruz-led examination, and it showed. The earlier committee members had asked procedural questions about the Transparency Act timeline and the department's review protocols. Cruz had been taking notes through all of it, building the sequence he would use when his turn came. He had arrived at the hearing with a specific architecture in mind, a series of questions designed to establish, through a progression of forced concessions, that the department's handling of the Epstein file review had been shaped by considerations that the Transparency Act had not authorized. He is a Texas senator and former Solicitor General of Texas who argued before the Supreme Court 9 times before entering politics. He constructs legal arguments the way structural engineers construct load-bearing frameworks, every element positioned to support the element that follows it. He had constructed this one carefully. He had been executing it with precision for 20 minutes. Bondi had been managing the sequence. She had deflected 6 questions, conceded 3 foundational points that she had calculated were survivable, and was preparing for what she understood to be the closing phase of Cruz's examination, the phase in which his prior concessions would be assembled into a conclusion she would need to resist. She did not resist, she redirected. She reached into the folder beside her and produced a document. She placed it on the table. She said one sentence. Senator, before you finish, I want to make sure this committee has seen this. Cruz looked at the document for 3 seconds before he picked it up. The room read his face as he read the first page, not his expression. His expression was controlled, the expression of a former appellate litigator who has trained himself not to show a jury what he is thinking while he is thinking it. What the room read was the pace of his reading. He slowed at the bottom of the first page. He slowed further at the top of the second. By the middle of the second page he had stopped moving entirely, 58 seconds. The cameras held him from 2 angles. The court reporter had stopped at 6 seconds. His pen, which had been moving almost continuously since the session opened, was flat on the desk. The committee chair had leaned forward at the 14-second mark and had not moved back. A senior Republican aide seated in the second row behind the panel had risen slightly from his chair, not standing, not sitting, suspended in the particular posture of someone who is deciding whether to intervene and has not yet decided. The press gallery had gone entirely still. No keyboards, no movement, no ambient sound, 58 full seconds. Then Cruz set the document down. He looked at Bondi, he looked at the chair, he looked back at the document, he picked it up again. He read the top of the first page one more time. Then he said, "Where did this come from?" It was not a question formatted as a question. It was a question formatted as a statement, delivered in the flat, controlled voice of a man who is processing something significant and has not yet decided what the significant thing means for the next 15 minutes of his prepared examination. Bondi said the document had been part of the department's internal record throughout the period of the Epstein file review. She said it had been properly maintained in the department's filing system. She said it had not been part of any prior public disclosure because it had not previously been specifically requested or subpoenaed. Cruz looked at the document again. He set it down. He looked at his legal pad, the legal pad on which he had written the architecture of his 20-minute examination. He looked at the document again. The document existed in direct contradiction to the conclusion his examination had been designed to establish, not in the sense that it refuted his evidence. In the more fundamental sense that it introduced a set of facts that his prepared sequence of questions had not accounted for, and that a former Supreme Court litigator who has spent his career constructing cases from available evidence recognizes immediately as the kind of thing that requires the entire structure to be rebuilt from a new foundation. The committee chair said, "Senator Cruz, do you wish to continue?" Cruz said, "Give me a moment." The room gave him the moment. It gave him 3 more moments after that, because what Bondi had placed on that table had not just redirected the hearing, it had redirected the direction of the series. The document was an internal department memorandum. It was dated within the period of Bondi's confirmed tenure. Its subject line identified it as an assessment of congressional oversight activities related to the Epstein file review. And its contents, which Cruz read in 58 seconds and which the cameras recorded him reading, described a set of communications between the department and specific Senate offices during the period of the December 19th deadline and its aftermath. Communications that, according to the memorandum, had included the provision of advance information about which materials would and would not be released by the deadline, before the deadline's passage was publicly confirmed. The memorandum did not identify the Senate offices by name, it identified them by committee assignment and seniority position. The committee assignments and seniority positions described in the memorandum were consistent with two members of the Senate Commerce Committee. One of them was the chair, one of them was Cruz. Cruz continued his examination after the 3 moments he had asked for. He was precise, he was controlled. He asked 4 questions about the document's provenance, its authentication status, and the department's rationale for not including it in prior disclosures. Bondi answered each question with the careful, source specificity of someone who had prepared for exactly these follow-up questions and had the documentation to support each answer. She had not brought the document to end the hearing, she had brought it to change what the hearing was about. Cruz understood that, the room understood it. The committee chair, who had leaned forward at the 14-second mark and not moved back for the remainder of the session, understood it with particular urgency given what the memorandum's committee assignment references implied about the advance information described therein. Cruz's response, when it came in the final phase of the session, was not defensive. It was not dismissive. It was the response of a former appellate litigator who has encountered new evidence in the middle of an argument and recalculates rather than pretends the evidence does not change anything. He said, "This committee is going to need to examine this document in a closed session with full authentication before any public characterization of its contents is appropriate." Then he looked at Bondi. He said, "And I want to know every other document in that folder." The Epstein Files Transparency Act was signed by President Trump in November 2025. It set a statutory deadline of December 19th for the full release of Epstein-related Department of Justice materials. The department missed that deadline. Roughly 2.5 million files remained withheld, confirmed by Ranking Member Robert Garcia's office and reported by The Washington Post and The Hill. High-profile names were redacted in documents where victim-identifying information was not. House Oversight subpoenaed Bondi for a closed-door deposition in late March 2026. She did not appear on April 14th. Robert Garcia filed a contempt resolution on April 29th. Within 45 minutes, Republicans on the panel announced a new testimony date. The Washington Post confirmed the same day that Bondi had agreed to testify. That testimony was rescheduled for May 29, 2026. Tim Burchett, Republican congressman from Tennessee and one of 4 GOP members who had originally backed the subpoena, had said on the record that Bondi simply did not have the knowledge of what the files contained. What Bondi's document added to that record was something that 9 prior sessions of committee questioning had not produced. A piece of evidence introduced not by a committee member but by the witness herself. That reversal carries a specific weight in the architecture of a congressional record. A witness who produces a document is not deflecting. A witness who produces a document is making a claim. The claim in this case was that the committee's examination of the department's conduct needed to include the department's record of its communications with the committee itself. That is not a defensive move. It is an offensive one. And Cruz's immediate recognition of what the document implied, his stillness, his 3 moments, his request for everything else in the folder, was the committee's acknowledgement on the record that the move had landed. Bondi gathered her papers when the session ended. She moved with the particular composure of someone who placed something on a table and watched the room recalibrate around it. Her attorney was quiet beside her. They left through the corridor without stopping. Cruz said 5 words to the cameras outside the chamber. "That folder changes everything, everything." He said it twice, then he walked back through the doors. By nightfall, the hearing had stopped being a Cruz examination of Bondi and had become a question about what the department had communicated to Senate offices before the December 19th deadline, and whether those communications had been disclosed as part of the Transparency Act's requirements, and what the memorandum's committee assignment references meant for the oversight process that had been generating those communications as its subject matter. The hearing had become the moment the witness changed the direction of the inquiry, and the committee was now holding the document she had handed it. Within hours, the footage had reached every major platform, not the 20 minutes of Cruz's structured examination, not the foundational questions about the Transparency Act, just the moment Bondi produced the document, the sentence she used to introduce it, and 58 seconds of Cruz reading it in silence. The footage ran with the committee chair's posture visible throughout, leaned forward, not moving, and the senior Republican aide suspended between sitting and standing in the second row behind the panel. It did not require commentary. The postures in the room provided it. The Washington Post published a detailed account by early evening reporting on the document's subject matter, and its implications for the relationship between the department's advanced communications and the Senate offices described by committee assignment in the memorandum. The account noted that the document had not appeared in any prior Transparency Act disclosure, and that the department had not previously acknowledged its existence in any public proceeding. The Hill ran a parallel examination of what the memorandum's description of advance information communications meant for the oversight record the series had been building, and whether the document's introduction by the witness rather than by a committee member altered the procedural posture of the May 29 testimony date. Legal analysts focused on a question the series had not previously encountered: the evidentiary weight of a document introduced by a witness rather than by a committee. Several noted that a witness-introduced document carries a different kind of authority in a congressional record than a committee-introduced one specifically, that it cannot be characterized as a committee's adversarial framing of evidence, and that the witness bears direct accountability for its accuracy and completeness. Bondi had, by introducing the document, made herself responsible for it in the record. Cruz's request for everything else in the folder was noted by every analyst as the most significant single sentence of the session. It was not a legal demand. It was the signal of a former Supreme Court litigator who has just encountered evidence he did not prepare for and has decided that the most important thing now is to understand its full scope before the next hearing. Inside the department, the response was not the familiar closed-door silence. By the second day, the department had issued a brief public statement confirming the document's existence and its internal provenance, characterizing it as a routine oversight communication consistent with the department's standard legislative affairs protocols, and noting that its contents would be made available through appropriate channels for committee review. It was the first public statement the department had issued in response to any session in the series. The series had produced 10 sessions of closed-door responses. The 11th produced a statement. That distinction is its own kind of evidence. This is what the series has documented across 10 sessions, and the 11th session changed its nature in a way worth naming directly. The prior 10 sessions were structured as committee interrogations of a witness. The committee introduced evidence, the witness responded. The record accumulated in one direction, away from the department's public characterizations and toward the documented reality of what occurred inside it. The 11th session inverted that structure. The witness introduced evidence, the committee responded, the record accumulated in a new direction, toward the question of what the department had communicated to the committee itself during the period the committee was supposed to be conducting independent oversight. That is not a tactical surprise in a hearing. It is a structural observation about the nature of the oversight process this series has been documenting. If the department communicated advance information about its disclosure decisions to Senate offices before the December 19 deadline, and if those communications were not part of the public record the Transparency Act was designed to produce, then the oversight process and the process being overseen were not fully independent during the period they were supposed to be. That is the implication the memorandum introduced. That is the implication Cruz's 58 seconds of silence, his 3 moments, and his request for the full folder registered publicly on the record. The Transparency Act set a deadline, the deadline was missed, the deposition was subpoenaed, the deposition did not happen, the contempt resolution was filed, the testimony was rescheduled, 4 Republican members resisted the contempt vote. Tim Burchett said Bondi did not have the knowledge. 9 prior sessions built a record of what the department said and what the documents showed. The 10th session introduced audio from inside the department. The 11th session introduced a document describing the department's communications with the committee that was supposed to be overseeing it. The record is now asking a question about itself, and that is the most significant development in 11 sessions of documented accumulation. The next time someone walks into that hearing room, Bondi's document will already be in the record, Cruz's 58 seconds will be there, his request for the full folder will be there, and the department's public statement, the first one issued in response to any session in this series, will be there beside all of it. At what point does a document describing communications between the department and Senate oversight offices, introduced by the witness herself, sitting in the congressional record beside a public statement the department issued in response to a hearing for the first time in 11 sessions, stop being treated as a routine oversight communication and start being treated as the question it has placed at the center of every prior session's accumulated record? Write that below. The record is open. Cruz has the folder, and unlike the 2.5 million files that were supposed to be released by December 19, 2025, this document came out voluntarily, which means the question now is not whether the department will release it, but what releasing it was designed to do.